standing at the kitchen counter, pouring my second cup of coffee, when my phone lit up with a text from my attorney. 3 words, all caps. Calling me now. I set the mug down. Coffee sloshed over the rim, and I didn't even reach for a paper towel. I just stared at the screen. My attorney, Thomas Gale, had been handling our family's real estate trust for 11 years. He wasn't the kind of man who texted at 8:47 on a Wednesday morning. He wasn't the kind of man who texted at all. I called him before I made it to the living room. He picked up on the first ring. "Don't go to the closing," he said. "No hello. No how are you, just that." I stopped walking. "What?" "The signing today. Do not go. I need you to come to my office first. I have something you need to see." My brother-in-law had scheduled the closing for 10 a.m., the sale of my mother's property, 43 acres in Central Virginia, the house she'd lived in for 31 years, the land my grandfather had bought when he came back from Korea, with nothing but a duffel bag and a plan. I had been dreading that meeting for months, dreading it, but resigned to it. Or so I thought. "Thomas, what's going on?" There was a pause, the kind of pause that has weight to it. "Just come in," he said. "Come in now." I grabbed my keys. My mother died 14 months ago. Pancreatic cancer. The kind that moves fast, gives you almost no warning, and then takes everything. She was 68. She had been planning to retire that spring, start her garden properly, maybe finally visit Portugal like she'd been talking about for 20 years. She didn't make it to February. What she left behind was the house, the land, a small investment account, and a will she'd written 8 years earlier with Thomas's help. The will was clear. The land was to be held in a family trust. I was the named trustee. My older sister Dana would receive a monthly disbursement from the rental income on the 2 cottages at the back of the property. Equal shares if we ever agreed to sell. Neither of us could force a sale without the other's consent. That was the part that mattered. That was the part Dana had apparently decided to work around. Dana is 5 years older than me. We were close once, genuinely close, the kind of sisters who called each other twice a week and finished each other's sentences. That closeness started to crack when she married her husband Preston. Not because I disliked Preston at first. I didn't. He was charming, which I later understood was his primary skill. He was a commercial real estate developer in the DC area, always working on something, always talking about deals the way other people talked about the weather. I should have paid more attention to what he was actually saying. The grief after Mom died did something to Dana, or maybe it revealed something that was already there. Within 3 weeks of the funeral, she was asking about the will. Within 6 weeks, she was asking me to consider selling. I said I wasn't ready. She said I was being sentimental. I said the land was part of our mother's legacy and I wanted to honor what she'd asked for. Dana said our mother wasn't around to care anymore. I remember sitting in my car after that phone call and just breathing, just telling myself she was grieving. That grief made people say things. I extended a lot of grace to Dana over those 14 months, more than I should have. Thomas's office is a 20-minute drive from my house. I made it in 14. His assistant waved me straight through to the conference room, which told me he'd been watching from my car. Thomas was standing when I walked in. That was the first thing I noticed. Thomas Gale does not stand for things. He's 71 years old and he has bad knees and he sits for everything. He was standing at the head of the table with the manila folder in front of him and an expression I had never seen on his face before. "Sit down, sweetheart," he said. He's known me since I was 12. He calls me sweetheart. I sat. He slid the folder across the table. "Preston came to me 6 weeks ago," he said. "He represented himself as acting on your behalf. He had a document, a power of attorney, with your signature on it, authorizing him to negotiate and execute the sale of the property." I looked up from the folder. "He also had a signed amendment to the trust," Thomas continued, "apparently dissolving the trustee structure and converting the asset to a joint tenancy with right of survivorship. Meaning if you were to die, Dana would inherit everything automatically, no trust, no conditions." I heard the words. They didn't arrange themselves into meaning for a moment. "My signature," I said. "Your signature," he confirmed, "on both documents." I opened the folder. I looked at the pages. The signature at the bottom looked like mine. The loops, the way I write my last name, the small mark I make at the end out of habit, it looked exactly like mine. I didn't sign these, I said. I know, Thomas said. I know you didn't. That's why I called you this morning. He sat down then. He folded his hands on the table. I've been doing this for 40 years. I've seen forged documents before. Not many, but enough. There's a rhythm to how a person signs their name. The pressure, the speed, the natural imperfections. These are too clean. Someone traced over your signature, possibly from the closing documents you signed on the cottage lease renewal last spring. He paused. I should have caught it sooner. I'm sorry for that. I was still looking at my name on the page. The buyer is a development group, Thomas continued. Preston's development group. Shell company, different name, but I traced it. He found a buyer who was himself. He was going to sell your mother's land to his own LLC for $800,000 under market value. The number landed somewhere in my chest. And Dana knew? I asked. Thomas looked at me steadily. The proceeds were to be deposited into a joint account. I'll let you draw your own conclusions. I drove home in a kind of calm that frightened me a little. Not numbness exactly. More like the way everything goes very still right before something breaks. I had known, I think, on some level that something was wrong. Not this. I hadn't imagined this. But there had been signs I'd explained away. There was the afternoon 6 months ago when I noticed a charge on the joint expense account we'd kept for property maintenance, a notary fee I hadn't authorized. I asked Dana about it and she said Preston had needed something notarized for a preliminary assessment on the property's market value. I accepted that. I shouldn't have. There was the email from the county assessor's office that I'd received in March, addressed to me but referencing a rezoning inquiry I'd never filed. I called the office and they said someone had submitted it on my behalf. I thought it was an administrative error. I filed a correction. I moved on. There was the conversation at Easter, the last time I saw Dana in person, where Preston spent 40 minutes talking about what a shame it was that the property was sitting there underperforming when it could be generating real value for both of you. I smiled and changed the subject. I thought it was Preston being Preston. It wasn't Preston being Preston, it was Preston laying groundwork. What I hadn't known, what I couldn't have known without Thomas showing me, was the scope of it, the power of attorney, the trust amendment, the shell company, the staged closing, scheduled for a day when, based on what I could only assume was my Google Calendar, I was supposed to be 3 hours away at my cousin's bridal shower in Richmond. I had canceled that trip 4 days earlier because my cousin postponed it. I hadn't told Dana. If I had gotten in my car and driven to Richmond that morning the way the calendar showed, the closing would have happened without me. The documents would have been executed. The land would have been transferred. I sat in my driveway for a long time. Then I called Thomas back and told him I wanted to pursue every option available to me. I was hoping you'd say that, he said. I've already called someone. The forensic document examiner Thomas brought in was a woman named Dr. Whitfield, retired FBI. She wore bifocals and spoke in short declarative sentences, and within 48 hours, she confirmed what Thomas had suspected. The signatures were traced. She identified the source document, the lease renewal, just as Thomas thought, and found evidence of scanning and digital layering in the power of attorney. Whoever had done it was not a professional. They were just careful enough to fool someone who wasn't looking closely. Thomas filed a complaint with the state bar, since the closing had been arranged through a settlement attorney who had apparently accepted the power of attorney without adequate verification. He also contacted a forensic accountant to trace the shell company structure. I, meanwhile, had to decide what to do about Dana. I didn't call her. I thought about it every day for the first week and I didn't do it. Part of me wanted to give her the chance to explain, to tell me Preston had done this without her knowledge, to give me something I could believe. But I kept coming back to the joint account, the account where the proceeds were supposed to land, Dana's name on that account. I pulled up her text history instead. I read it from the beginning. 14 months of messages, and when I read them with fresh eyes, knowing what I knew, patterns emerged that I hadn't noticed in real time. In October, she'd asked me offhandedly whether I used the same email for everything or had a separate one for legal documents. I'd told her. I use one email. I use it for everything. In January, she'd asked me to resend the trust document because she said she lost her copy. I'd emailed it as a PDF. In March, she'd asked me what I was doing for Easter weekend and mentioned, very casually, that my cousin had been talking about finally nailing down a date for her shower. A month later, the bridal shower appeared on my Google Calendar as an invitation from my cousin. Except I'd never actually received that invitation directly from my cousin. I just assumed she'd added me and forgotten about it. I went back to my cousin and asked her. She hadn't sent me a calendar invite. She hadn't even confirmed the date in March. She'd mentioned it vaguely at Christmas. Someone had added a fake event to my calendar to get me out of the house on the day of the closing. I sat with that for a long time, the deliberateness of it. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't desperation. It was planned, step by step, over the course of months. My own sister had looked at my life and figured out how to move me around in it without my knowing. I thought about my mother. I thought about her sitting at the kitchen table in that house, the house we'd all grown up in. The morning she told us she was sick, the way she'd reached across and held both our hands at once. I thought about how she'd trusted the two of us with the thing she loved most. I didn't cry. I was too far past crying by then. Thomas's forensic accountant, a quietly intense man named Mr. Okafor, traced the shell company in 11 days. Hartwell Property Solutions, LLC, registered in Delaware, sole member Preston Allen Voss Incorporated, 4 months after my mother's funeral. The buyer's agent on the proposed sale had communicated directly with Preston under that name. Mr. Okafor found wire transfer instructions that would have routed the purchase funds from the Hartwell account to a separate account at a credit union in Maryland, an account held jointly by Preston and Dana. There were also records of 2 earlier transactions. Properties Preston had sold in the past 3 years where the documentation trail was, according to Mr. Okafor, irregular. He flagged those for a separate inquiry. Thomas referred everything to the Virginia State Police Economic Crimes Unit and to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. The FBI, it turned out, was already mildly interested in Preston for reasons that had nothing to do with us. I learned that last part later. In the meantime, I had a decision to make about the closing, which had been postponed when I didn't show up, and Thomas notified the settlement attorney that the power of attorney was under challenge. Preston had called Thomas's office twice in the days afterward. Thomas hadn't taken the calls. Dana texted me. "Hey, haven't heard from you in a bit. Everything okay?" I didn't respond. 3 days later, "Did something happen? You're kind of worrying me." I read the message. I put my phone face down on the counter. I thought about what it meant that she could send that text, that she could write, "You're worrying me," and I didn't have an answer that made her seem anything other than what the evidence suggested she was. The moment that broke the careful composure I'd been holding for 5 weeks happened on a Tuesday. I was on a call with Thomas going over the criminal referral documentation when he mentioned, in a matter-of-fact way, that Preston had apparently tried to access the property the previous weekend. The caretaker I employed, a man who'd worked the grounds for 16 years and was closer to family than employee, had turned him away. Preston had told him he was there to take some measurements. The caretaker had told him he wasn't authorized to be on the property and to leave. Preston had argued for a few minutes, then he left. I thought about my mother's tulip beds along the south fence, the kitchen garden she planted every spring, the oak tree in the backyard with the initials she and my father had carved the summer before he passed. Preston standing there with a measuring tape, calculating what it was worth per square foot. I asked Thomas if we could add trespassing to the documentation. He said we already had. The FBI executed a search warrant on Preston's office in late September. I found out the same way most people find out things now, through someone who'd seen something and texted me. My neighbor called to say she'd seen a news alert. A local DC real estate developer, named in connection with a multi-property fraud investigation. Dana called me 11 minutes after that. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was 47 seconds long. She was crying. She said she hadn't known the full extent of what Preston had done. She said he'd told her it was a legal restructuring that would protect their interest in the estate. She said she'd signed things she hadn't fully read. She said she was sorry. She was so sorry. She needed to talk to me. I listened to it twice. I thought about the joint account. I thought about the Easter conversation. I thought about my calendar and the fake bridal shower and the 14 months of carefully casual questions. I thought about what it means to believe someone you've loved your whole life. I saved the voicemail. I didn't call back. I won't tell you the legal process was fast because it wasn't. It was 8 more months of documentation and depositions and a criminal proceeding that I was peripheral to but always aware of. Preston pleaded guilty to wire fraud and forgery in the 3rd month of the following year. He was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution. The shell company was dissolved. His real estate license was revoked. Dana was not charged. The prosecutors determined she had signed certain documents in what they assessed as willful ignorance rather than active conspiracy. Whether that distinction is accurate or fair is something I have turned over in my mind more times than I can count. What I know is that it's the legal conclusion they reached. She and Preston separated. She's living in an apartment in Bethesda now, as far as I know. She sent me a letter. Actual paper, envelope, stamp, in the spring. 6 pages. I read it once. I put it in a drawer. I haven't responded. Thomas filed to have the fraudulent documents formally voided and the trust reinstated with original terms. The court granted it. The 43 acres in Central Virginia are still held in the family trust. My name is still on it as trustee. I drove out there in April after the final order came through. I hadn't been back since the previous summer, when all of this was still building underneath the surface without my knowing. The caretaker walked the property with me, pointed out where the south fence needed repair, showed me what the long winter had done to the kitchen garden. We talked about what to plant in May. He'd kept the tulip beds. They were already coming up along the south fence, yellow and red, exactly the way my mother had planted them. I stood there for a while. The deed was clear, the land was protected, nobody was getting those acres. My mother had wanted this to be the thing that lasted, the thing we held on to. She hadn't been wrong to want that. She'd just been wrong about which of her daughters would be the one to let it go. I'm the one who held on, and I intend to keep holding. There's a moment I keep coming back to. I'm standing in my mother's kitchen garden in April, dirt still cold, tulips already pushing up along the south fence like they have every spring for 30 years. And I'm thinking, she trusted both of us, equally, without conditions. The way you trust people you've raised alongside yourself, people who share your blood and your memories, and the particular grief of losing the same person. She wasn't wrong to trust. That's what I've had to make peace with. Trust isn't naivety. The failure wasn't hers. What I've learned, and I mean really learned, not in the way you nod along to advice, but in the way something rewires inside you, is that integrity isn't about the big dramatic moments. It's not about whether you'd lie under oath or steal from a stranger. It's about the small decisions, the ones nobody's watching. Preston didn't become someone who forges documents overnight. He became that person gradually, through 100 smaller choices to take shortcuts, to treat other people's things as resources, to decide that what he wanted mattered more than what was true. Dana didn't conspire against me in a single moment. She let herself not look too closely, not ask too many questions, because the answers might have cost her something she wanted to keep. That's the thing about character. It compounds. And then there's Thomas, 71 years old, bad knees, noticing something slightly off in a stack of documents he could easily have processed and moved on from. Nobody would have known. It wouldn't have been his fault, but he looked closely and then he looked again, and then he picked up the phone at 8:47 on a Wednesday morning and sent me 3 words that changed everything. That's not a dramatic act. That's just a person who decided, years ago, what kind of professional he was going to be, and held that line every single day until it mattered in a way he couldn't have anticipated. I think about that a lot, the relationship between who you are quietly and who you are when something is actually at stake. I also think about what it took on my side. Not courage, exactly. I don't think of what I did as brave. But there was something required of me during those months that I hadn't been asked for before. I had to think clearly when I wanted to fall apart. I had to read documents when I wanted to grieve. I had to sit with uncertainty and not let it move me into a bad decision. I had to look at evidence about my own sister and follow it where it went, even when every part of me was hoping it would lead somewhere else. That's not easy. It doesn't feel like strength while you're in it. It feels like holding your breath for 8 months. But I held it. The land is still there. The The tulips came back. The trust documents have my name on them exactly the way my mother intended. None of that happened by accident. It happened because I paid attention, because I found people I could trust, and because I refused to let someone else's choices rewrite the end of my mother's story. What I'd tell anyone who's found themselves in something like this, a betrayal that lives inside your own family, the kind that makes you question everything you thought you understood about the people closest to you, is this: the way out is not through anger, and it's not through denial. It's through clarity. Get quiet, look at what's actually in front of you, find one person you know, without any doubt, to be honest, and then do the next right thing, even when you can't see past it to the thing after that. That's all I did. One right thing, then another, then another. It was enough.